The moment you see your own face staring back at you from a child who has never known your name, time doesn't slow down, it stops. Ethan Caldwell had closed billion-dollar mergers without his pulse shifting, had walked through hostile boardrooms with cameras flashing and never once broken eye contact. But when the small body collided with his leg at Gate 42 in Terminal 4, his breath left him like the cabin had suddenly lost pressure. The boy couldn't have been more than 5, maybe 3.5 feet tall, a backpack hanging crooked off one shoulder, tiny sneakers skidding slightly against the polished airport floor. Ethan instinctively reached down to steady him, fingers brushing the child's jacket, and that was when he saw it, the eyes. Steel gray, rimmed with dark lashes, set beneath a brow he knew too well. The same brow that had stared back at him from magazine covers and annual reports. The boy looked up, startled but not afraid, and for a suspended second the noise of rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, and jet engines outside the glass walls dissolved into a dull, distant hum. "Sorry, mister," the child said softly, voice warm, polite. Ethan's hand remained frozen midair because the voice wasn't what shook him. It was the face. Before he could form a thought, 2 more boys ran up from behind, nearly identical in height, identical in build, identical in the way their dark curls framed foreheads that mirrored his own childhood photographs. One grabbed the first boy's arm. The other held a toy airplane, carefully painted blue and white, the kind sold in airport gift shops for $14.99 near the checkout counter. They stood there together, 3 small silhouettes under the departure board, and Ethan felt the ground tilt beneath him. Triplets. The word formed without permission. The second boy tilted his head in the exact way Ethan did when analyzing numbers on a screen. The third had the same faint dimple that appeared when Ethan forced a rare smile at charity galas. This wasn't coincidence. This was reflection. "Boys." The voice came from behind them, calm and steady, a tone he hadn't heard in 5 years but recognized instantly. Naomi Brooks stepped forward from the waiting area, her carry-on balanced beside her leg, posture straight, eyes unwavering. She looked exactly the way he remembered, and completely different at the same time, stronger somehow, grounded in a way that didn't ask for approval. The boys moved toward her without hesitation, instinctively forming a half circle at her knees. She rested one protective hand lightly on the nearest shoulder, not pulling them back, not pushing them forward. Just steady. Ethan's name never left her lips, but recognition flickered in her gaze like a plane's landing light cutting through dusk. Around them, the terminal continued its rhythm. Overhead speakers announcing boarding for Los Angeles, a barista calling out a latte, the rumble of a departing jet shaking the glass. But within the invisible space between them, silence pressed tight. Ethan swallowed, his throat dry, eyes moving from Naomi to the 3 boys and back again. 5 years. 5 years since he had walked away from a conversation he thought was temporary, from a woman he believed would wait. He had calculated risk, protected reputation, secured expansion into European markets. He had not calculated this. One of the boys looked up at Naomi and asked, "Mom, is he coming on our flight?" The question wasn't accusatory. It was curious, innocent. Ethan felt something fracture inside his carefully constructed world, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet crack spreading beneath polished marble. Naomi's gaze never left his. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. And in her silence, he understood something far more powerful than accusation. This wasn't a surprise to her. It was a reckoning waiting at Gate 42, under fluorescent lights, in front of 3 living reflections he could no longer pretend not to see. Ethan did not realize he had stopped breathing until Naomi's voice, calm and level, broke through the silence. "Boys, give us a minute." She did not raise her tone. She did not look away from him. The 3 children hesitated only slightly, then stepped a few feet to the side, near the window overlooking the runway, where planes taxied in slow, deliberate lines under the late afternoon sun. They stayed close enough to hear her if she called, far enough to give space that felt heavier than any boardroom negotiation Ethan had ever entered. He straightened instinctively, shoulders back, the posture of a man used to control, but there was no control here. "Naomi," he said, her name rough in his throat, unfamiliar after years of silence. She held his gaze without hostility, without warmth, simply steady. "You look well, Ethan." It was not A compliment. It was a statement of fact. He glanced again at the boys. They were kneeling on the carpet now, lining up the small toy airplane and two plastic trucks with surprising precision. Wheels perfectly parallel, noses aligned toward the glass. He felt a chill travel up his spine because that was exactly how he arranged objects on his desk when thinking. How old are they? He asked quietly, though he already knew the answer. They turned 5 in April, Naomi replied. 5 years. 5 years since he had walked out of her apartment, phone buzzing with urgent calls about investors and public image, telling himself he would fix everything once the crisis passed. 5 years since he had said, "This is not my priority right now," and closed the door without looking back. Triplets, he whispered, the word landing heavier the second time. Naomi nodded once. Isaiah, Micah, and Jordan. She said their names with quiet pride, each syllable deliberate. He repeated them under his breath as if memorizing figures on a balance sheet, except this time the numbers had faces. Why did you not tell me? The question slipped out before he could measure it. Naomi did not react immediately. She glanced toward the boys, making sure they were still absorbed in their careful arrangement, then looked back at him. You changed your number. You changed your address. You changed your life. Her voice did not rise. I did not chase someone who made it clear he was leaving. The words did not accuse. They stated history. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He remembered the press conference, the flash of cameras, the legal team advising distance from anything that could complicate negotiations. He remembered believing time would smooth over what he had broken. He had not imagined 3 small reminders standing beneath a departure board. Are they mine? He asked finally, the question stripped of pride. Naomi's eyes did not waver. Yes. Just one word, steady and certain, like a verdict already decided. The terminal announcement called for boarding to Atlanta, the sound echoing above them, but Ethan barely heard it. His world had narrowed to the space between himself and the 3 boys who carried his features without ever carrying his name. One of them looked up then, catching Ethan staring, and offered a small, uncertain smile, the same guarded half-smile Ethan used when he did not know if he was welcome in a room. And for the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell felt like the one standing outside, waiting to see if he would be allowed in. The word yes did not echo. It settled, heavy and irreversible, between them like luggage that could no longer be checked and sent away. Ethan felt his heartbeat in his ears, steady but louder than it had any right to be. For years he had controlled outcomes with signatures and strategy, but this was not a contract to review. This was 5 years of birthdays, scraped knees, bedtime stories, and first words that had happened without him. He glanced toward the boys again. Isaiah was carefully adjusting the wing of the toy airplane, aligning it with the painted runway on the carpet pattern. Micah was counting under his breath, tapping each vehicle once as if conducting a silent inspection. Jordan looked up at the departure screen, reading letters slowly, sounding them out with determination. Ethan recognized the focus in all 3. It was the same intensity he had once been praised for in business magazines, now reflected in small hands and curious eyes. They know about me? He asked, his voice lower than before, stripped of command. Naomi folded her arms loosely, not defensive, just composed. They know their father left before they were born, she said. They know I told them he is smart, driven, and capable of big things. I did not teach them to hate someone they have never met. The restraint in her tone carried more weight than anger ever could. Ethan swallowed, the truth cutting deeper because she had protected his image when he had not protected her. Why? He asked quietly. Naomi looked toward the boys again, her expression softening only when her eyes rested on them. Because they deserve peace, she answered. Not my resentment. An announcement overhead called for final boarding for a flight to Chicago, and families began lining up, rolling carry-on bags behind them. Life moved around them with ordinary urgency, but Ethan felt suspended outside of it. Where are you headed? He asked. Atlanta, she replied. My sister lives there. We are visiting for the week. He nodded slowly, processing details like a man relearning how to think. Naomi, I did not know, he said, and for the first time there was no edge of defensiveness in his tone. I would have shown up. She met his gaze without flinching. You did not show up when it mattered, she said evenly. And I learned how to stop expecting you to. The statement was not cruel. It was factual, like a weather report delivered after a long storm. Ethan felt the quiet truth of it settle into his chest. One of the boys suddenly stood and walked toward him, the toy airplane still in his hand. It was Jordan, the smallest by maybe half an inch. He stopped a foot away, studying Ethan's face with open curiosity. "Mom," he called softly, not taking his eyes off Ethan. "He looks like us." Naomi did not correct him. She did not shield the moment. Ethan crouched slowly, bringing himself to the child's level, his expensive suit creasing against the airport carpet. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. Same eye color, same shape of nose, same faint line between the brows when concentrating. "What is your name?" Ethan asked gently. "Jordan," the boy replied. "And that is Isaiah and Micah." He pointed carefully, as if introducing teammates. Ethan nodded, committing each name deeper into memory. "It is nice to meet you, Jordan." The boy tilted his head slightly. "Are you staying?" The question was simple, but it carried 5 years of absence inside it. Ethan felt the weight of it press against everything he had built. For the first time in his life, the answer he wanted to give required more than confidence. It required presence. Jordan's question did not sound demanding. It sounded hopeful, and that was what unsettled Ethan the most. He remained crouched there on the airport carpet, the scent of roasted coffee drifting from a nearby kiosk, the rolling thunder of another plane taking off beyond the wide glass windows. For years he had measured his worth in quarterly growth and market expansion, but now a 5-year-old boy was measuring him by something far simpler. "Are you staying?" Ethan exhaled slowly, aware that anything he said next would not be filtered through public relations teams or legal counsel. "I am not getting on your flight," he answered carefully, keeping his voice steady. "But I do not want to disappear again." The words felt unfamiliar in his mouth, less polished, more honest. Jordan studied him for a moment longer, then nodded, once as if accepting the statement for what it was worth. Isaiah and Micah drifted closer, curiosity pulling them forward inch by inch until all three stood in front of him like a small jury waiting for clarity. Naomi watched the exchange without interrupting. Her posture remained composed, but Ethan could see the quiet calculation behind her eyes. She was not evaluating charm. She was evaluating consistency. "Boys," she said gently, "boarding will start soon." The three of them turned at the sound of her voice, instinctively returning to her side. The movement was fluid, practiced, a choreography built over years without him. Ethan stood slowly, brushing his hand over his suit jacket, though the gesture was more habit than necessity. "Naomi," he said, his tone lower now, stripped of ego, "I cannot change what I did. I thought I was protecting my future. I did not realize I was walking away from it." She held his gaze for a long second. "The future you chose did not include us," she replied quietly. "So I built one that did." There was no bitterness in her words, only fact. The departure screen flickered above them, announcing pre-boarding for families with young children. A line began forming near the gate, parents adjusting backpacks, children tugging at sleeves. Jordan reached for Naomi's hand. Micah adjusted the straps on his small backpack. Isaiah tucked the toy airplane carefully into its side pocket as if securing something important. Ethan felt an ache settle in his chest, not sharp, not dramatic, just steady and undeniable. "Can I call you?" he asked, the question directed at Naomi but carried by more than logistics. She studied him again, weighing years of absence against the sincerity she heard now. "You can," she said at last. "But understand this. Being their father is not about grand gestures. It is about showing up when it is inconvenient." The words landed with more force than any accusation. Ethan nodded slowly. "I understand." He was used to negotiations that ended with signatures. This one ended with expectation. The boarding agent scanned tickets one by one, the steady beep echoing in the background. Naomi stepped forward with the boys, then paused before entering the line fully. She turned back to him just once. "5 years ago you walked away because something else felt more urgent," she said softly. "If you decide to walk toward them now, do not stop halfway." Ethan felt the weight of that charge settle into his spine. The boys waved briefly, small hands lifting in unison, unaware of the magnitude of the moment. He lifted his hand in return, watching as they moved toward the jet bridge, 3 small figures walking beside a woman who had carried everything he had left behind. And as the line shortened and the gate area began to clear, Ethan Caldwell remained standing there, realizing that for the first time in his life, the most important decision he would ever make did not involve profit, power, or reputation. It involved whether he would finally learn how to stay. The gate area grew quiet after the last passenger disappeared down the jet bridge, and Ethan remained standing long after the boarding door closed, staring at the blank space where his sons had just been. The word sons felt unfamiliar, almost fragile, like something that could vanish if he moved too quickly. Outside the wide, terminal windows, the aircraft began to push back from the gate, its white body reflecting the late afternoon sun. He watched as the tug guided it away with careful precision, feeling the weight of Naomi's last words settle into him. Do not stop halfway. For years he had believed that success meant never hesitating, never looking back. Now he understood that what he had called forward motion had actually been escape. His phone vibrated in his pocket, the sharp buzz slicing through the quiet. He pulled it out and saw a message from his executive assistant reminding him of a conference call scheduled in 20 minutes with investors in San Francisco. Normally, he would have walked briskly toward the private lounge, adjusting his tie and shifting seamlessly into command. Instead, he silenced the notification and kept his eyes on the plane. As it taxied toward the runway, he imagined 3 small faces pressed to oval windows, unaware that the man standing inside the terminal was learning how to rearrange his priorities for the first time. The engines roared softly as the aircraft accelerated, then lifted into the sky with smooth confidence. Ethan felt something inside him rise with it. Not panic, not regret alone, but resolve. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, turning it over as if the blank back might offer direction. He did not want his first call to Naomi to sound like a negotiation. He did not want to offer solutions that came in the form of money. He had done that his entire adult life. Instead, he opened his phone and scrolled to a new contact entry. Naomi Brooks. He typed her name slowly, carefully, as if committing it again to memory. He did not have her number yet, but he would find a respectful way to ask for it. Not through assistants. Not through public records. Through her. The loudspeaker announced another departure, families shuffling past him with excitement and impatience. Ethan finally moved, not toward the private lounge, but toward a quiet seating area near the windows where he could think without interruption. He sat down, elbows resting on his knees, and allowed the truth to settle fully. 5 years ago, he had chosen expansion over intimacy, reputation over responsibility. He had convinced himself that timing was everything. Now he understood that presence was everything. His phone buzzed again, another reminder about the call. He stared at the screen for a moment, then pressed decline. The investors would wait. Markets would fluctuate and recover. But 3 5-year-old boys had asked him a question that did not come with a reschedule option. Are you staying? Ethan inhaled deeply, feeling the recycled airport air fill his lungs, and for the first time in years he made a decision without consulting a strategy team. He would fly to Atlanta at the end of the week. Not with gifts. Not with grand declarations. Just with time. He rose from the seat slowly, straightening his jacket as passengers hurried around him, and walked toward the exit with a different kind of urgency, one that did not chase profit, but connection. 3 days later, Ethan stood in his corner office overlooking Manhattan, but the skyline no longer impressed him the way it once had. The glass walls reflected a man who looked composed on the outside, yet carried a quiet unrest beneath the tailored suit. The city moved below in steady rhythm, yellow taxis weaving through traffic, pedestrians crossing avenues with determined strides, but his mind was not in New York. It was in Atlanta, in a modest house he had never seen, where 3 5-year-old boys were likely arguing over cereal choices or lining up toy cars along a living room rug. He had kept his word to himself. The first evening after the airport, he had sent Naomi a brief message through the only contact he could respectfully reach, a mutual acquaintance from years ago, asking if she would be willing to speak. No pressure, no demands, just a request. She had responded the next morning with a single line and a phone number. Call tonight at 7. Ethan had built an empire on anticipation, but nothing had prepared him for waiting until 7 o'clock. When the time finally came, he stepped out onto the small balcony attached to his office, the late spring air cool against his face. He dialed carefully, listening to each ring with attention that no investor call had ever created. Naomi answered on the 4th ring. Her voice was steady, unchanged, Hello. He cleared his throat softly. Thank you for taking my call. There was a brief pause. Not uncomfortable, just measured. The boys are finishing dinner, she said. In the background he could faintly hear laughter, the clink of silverware against plates, the soft murmur of young voices overlapping one another. The sound struck him harder than any accusation could have. I wanted to say something clearly, he began. I am not calling to rewrite the past. I am calling to ask how I can begin showing up now. Silence followed, but it was thoughtful silence. Showing up means consistency, Naomi replied. It means video calls when you say you will. It means remembering birthdays without reminders from an assistant. It means asking about their day even when you are tired. Each sentence landed like a new definition of responsibility. Ethan listened without interrupting. I can do that, he said quietly. I want to do that. Naomi exhaled softly. We can start with a video call tomorrow evening. 6:30 our time. He glanced at the skyline instinctively, calculating the time difference. That works, he answered without hesitation. There was a rustle on the other end, then a small voice drifting closer. Mom, is that him? Jordan's voice carried through the speaker, curious and hopeful. Ethan felt his chest tighten, not from pressure, but from possibility. Naomi did not shield the moment. Yes, she said gently. It is. A brief shuffle followed, then another voice, likely Isaiah, asking if he could say hello. Ethan stepped fully into the quiet of the balcony, leaning against the railing as if grounding himself. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts, but this was the first agreement that required no paperwork, only presence. As the evening light dimmed over Manhattan, Ethan Caldwell understood that redemption would not come from grand gestures or sudden transformation. It would come from answering small questions consistently, from choosing to remain when staying felt unfamiliar. And for the first time in a long while, the path forward did not look like a boardroom. It looked like a screen lighting up at 6:30 tomorrow evening, with 3 small faces waiting to see if he would be there. At exactly 6:30 the next evening, Ethan sat at the small dining table in his Manhattan apartment instead of his office desk, the city lights beginning to flicker on beyond the windows. He had moved his laptop to a place that felt less corporate, less guarded. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic 12 stories below. He had ended his final meeting 15 minutes early, ignoring the raised brows of his senior partners. When the screen finally lit up, his reflection disappeared, and 3 small faces filled the frame at once, overlapping and shifting as they tried to fit into view. Hi, Micah said first, his voice slightly louder than necessary, as if volume could bridge distance. Isaiah leaned closer, examining the camera with analytical curiosity. Jordan smiled openly, the same guarded half-smile he had offered at the airport, now softened by familiarity. Naomi sat just behind them, visible but not centered, allowing the moment to belong to the boys. Ethan felt his chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with responsibility. Hello, Isaiah. Hello, Micah. Hello, Jordan, he said carefully, making sure to pronounce each name clearly. The boys reacted instantly to hearing their names spoken back to them. Mom said you build buildings, Isaiah announced. And companies, Micah added quickly. Jordan tilted his head. Do you build airplanes too? Ethan allowed himself a small smile. I do not build airplanes, he replied gently, but I help build ideas. And sometimes those ideas turn into things people use every day. He paused, then added, but I am learning something new right now. What? Micah asked. Ethan looked at each of them in turn. I am learning how to be someone who shows up. The words felt simple, but they carried weight. The boys did not fully grasp the meaning, yet something in his tone made them still for a second. Naomi watched quietly, her expression unreadable but attentive. The conversation shifted naturally to school projects, favorite cartoons, and a loose front tooth that Isaiah proudly displayed to the camera. Ethan listened more than he spoke, asking small questions, memorizing details. Which one preferred peanut butter over jelly? Which one slept with a nightlight? Which one insisted on lining up shoes by the door before bedtime? These were not facts for a presentation. They were pieces of a life he had missed. 20 minutes passed quickly, when Jordan suddenly asked, Are you coming to Atlanta? Ethan felt the question land again, steady and direct. He glanced briefly toward Naomi, who did not intervene. Yes, he answered, this time without hesitation. I will be there on Saturday morning. The boys reacted with unfiltered excitement, talking over one another about parks and pancakes and showing him their room. Ethan felt a quiet warmth spread through him, unfamiliar but grounding. After the call ended, the screen fading back to his own reflection, he remained seated for several seconds. He had kept his promise today. He had shown up. It was only the first step, small and almost ordinary, yet it felt more significant than any headline he had ever earned. And as he closed the laptop gently, he understood that redemption would not arrive in a single grand moment. It would build, call by call, visit by visit, choice by choice, until staying no longer felt like effort, but like home. Saturday morning arrived with a different kind of anticipation than any quarterly report had ever brought. Ethan's flight touched down in Atlanta just after 9 o'clock, sunlight pouring through the cabin windows as the plane taxied toward the gate. He had chosen a commercial flight, no private terminal, no special entrance, just a seat by the window and 3 hours to think about what staying would actually require. As he stepped into the terminal, the air felt warmer than New York, softer somehow, carrying the scent of coffee and cinnamon from a nearby kiosk. He adjusted the strap of the small overnight bag he carried himself, resisting the instinct to delegate even this simple action. Naomi had sent him the address the night before, along with a brief message. The boys are excited. Be on time. He had read that line twice, understanding it was not just about punctuality. It was about trust. The drive from the airport took 20 minutes, past tree-lined neighborhoods and modest brick homes with wide porches and trimmed lawns. This was not the world of glass towers and skyline views. It was quieter, more grounded. When he pulled up in front of the house Naomi had described, he noticed a basketball hoop near the driveway and 3 small bicycles leaning against the garage, each marked with a different color ribbon tied around the handlebars. He turned off the engine and sat there for a second, steadying himself. He had negotiated international contracts without hesitation, yet knocking on this door felt more significant than any acquisition he had ever signed. The front door opened before he reached it. Isaiah stood there first, unable to contain his excitement, with Micah and Jordan close behind him. "You came," Micah said, as if still testing the reality of it. Ethan knelt down instinctively, meeting them at eye level again, just as he had in the airport. "I said I would," he replied gently. Jordan stepped forward without hesitation this time and wrapped his small arms around Ethan's shoulders. The gesture was brief, almost cautious, but it carried more acceptance than words could. Ethan felt the warmth of that contact settle deep inside him, dissolving the last layer of distance he had carried from New York. Naomi stood just inside the doorway, watching the exchange carefully. Her expression was calm, not sentimental, but there was something softer in her eyes than before. "Welcome," she said quietly. It was not dramatic. It was simple. Ethan stepped into the house, noticing family photos lining the hallway, school drawings taped neatly to the refrigerator, a calendar on the wall marked with activities and reminders. This was a life built without him, structured and stable. The boys immediately began pulling him toward the living room, talking over one another about a park nearby, about pancakes their aunt made on Sundays, about a science project involving baking soda and vinegar. Ethan listened, absorbing every detail, aware that he was not entering as a hero or a savior. He was entering as a learner. As the morning light streamed through the living room windows and the sound of their laughter filled the space, Ethan understood that redemption was not a single moment of apology. It was this: showing up at a front door, kneeling down on a living room rug, listening to 3 voices at once, and choosing, again and again, not to leave. By late afternoon, the house had settled into a comfortable rhythm that no longer felt foreign to Ethan. The boys had insisted on showing him everything, from the small garden patch in the backyard where they were attempting to grow tomatoes, to the corner of the living room where a cardboard rocket ship stood proudly decorated with silver paint and unevenly cut stars. He found himself seated cross-legged on the grass behind the house, while Isaiah explained the rules of an invented game that involved chasing shadows and pretending the wooden fence was the edge of outer space. Micah kept careful score on a small notepad, though the numbers changed depending on who was winning. Jordan stayed closest to Ethan, occasionally glancing up as if confirming he was still there. The Georgia sun hung low, casting long golden streaks across the yard, And for the first time in years, Ethan felt completely removed from the urgency of conference calls and market updates. There were no flashing notifications, no assistants waiting for instruction, only 3 young voices calling his name, without title or expectation. When Naomi stepped onto the back porch with glasses of lemonade balanced carefully on a tray, Ethan rose instinctively to help her. Their eyes met briefly, and in that quiet exchange there was acknowledgement, not forgiveness yet, but recognition of effort. "They like you," she said softly as the boys ran past them again, laughter trailing behind. Ethan watched them, his expression thoughtful. "I like them," he replied, and the simplicity of the statement carried more truth than anything elaborate he could have offered. As evening approached, the boys grew tired, their energy slowing into soft yawns and heavy blinks. After dinner, they gathered on the living room rug, leaning against Ethan as he read from a well-worn children's book Naomi handed him. His voice was steady, careful with each word, aware that this small ritual was something he had missed 5 years ago. Isaiah corrected his pronunciation of a dinosaur name. Micah insisted on turning the page. Jordan rested his head lightly against Ethan's arm, already drifting toward sleep. When the story ended, and Naomi guided them toward their bedrooms, Jordan paused in the hallway and looked back. "You are coming tomorrow too, right?" he asked, voice quiet but hopeful. Ethan met his gaze without hesitation. "Yes," he answered. "I am not leaving yet." The words settled into the house like a promise spoken aloud for the first time. Later, standing alone in the backyard as the sky deepened into indigo, Ethan reflected on how different this day had been from the life he once prioritized. There had been no contracts signed, no headlines written, yet something far more significant had shifted. He had chosen to stay through an ordinary day, through laughter and small disagreements, through lemonade spills and bedtime routines. Inside, he could hear Naomi moving softly through the hallway, turning off lights one by one. The house felt steady, grounded in something real. Ethan understood then that fatherhood was not proven by resemblance alone, nor by a single emotional reunion. It was proven by return, by consistency, by choosing the front door over the exit. And as he stepped back inside, closing the door gently behind him, he knew that the question asked at the airport had found its answer not in words, but in presence.